Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. Welcome. Just a couple of quick announcements. First, tonight there is an open mic following the faculty ratings out here outside, starting at 9:15. We will open, if you go out the front, we'll open the doors so you can cut through the little corridor there, or you can go around. Other than that, tomorrow from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m., aka lunchtime, provided lunchtime. At the front tables at the Swanee Inn, there's an unofficial BIPOC gathering, so you're welcome to grab lunch and head to those tables out front. We'll have another Pilates class tomorrow at 11 in the shade at the French House or virtually, so see you there if you want to join. And with that, I'll welcome Jess Walter up to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, and thank you for welcoming me to Sewanee. I really do feel welcome and as at home as someone can in this incredibly strange, humid, non-mountainy terrain. So thank you. And thanks, Gwen, Leah, and Adam, and the amazing staff. I want to thank my great workshop, and especially Adrian, my good friend and workshop partner. This place is everything you promised it would be. I'm going to read two very short stories, from one of which is in my book, The Angel of Rome, which just came out. There are two, thanks. At that point, he panders for applause. There are two novellas in the story and then some medium-length stories, and I love writing short stories almost as kind of palate cleansers, so I'm going to read two of those tonight. I like how the poets do it, so I'll tell you one of them is about 5 minutes and one is about 12. The interesting thing about these stories is we've been talking in class a lot about making choices, these hard choices you have to make. And one of these stories was the last one in, and the other one was the first one out. I'll let you choose which is which. And the other thing about one of these stories is on the way in, Norris picked me up and said, I read Angel of Rome, and I want to know why blank story wasn't in there. And then requested that I read it. As a writer, you never get requests. It's like, this story is my free bird. So, and a slight warning, it's kind of a horror story, so you might be scared. It's called Cheston with an exclamation point. Something was the matter with the baby. He seems depressed, said the father. I don't think babies can get depressed, said the mother. She suspected Cheston was mimicking the father, who sometimes affected the sort of spiritual weariness that blues players exhibited, or aging gunfighters. Anyone can get depressed, the father said, defensively. He wondered if the mother calling Cheston the baby wasn't the real problem. After all, he was nearly 4. The father decided to start calling him Buddy. Cheston was playing Legos. The father walked over. What are you building, Buddy? Gallows, said Cheston. The mother tried to sound cheerful. Who are you hanging? Buddy, the father added. Hope, Cheston said. The Lego man twisted in the still air. How about the trampoline place for your birthday, the mother asked. Cheston was coloring. He used only one crayon, black. SpongeBob, Squidward, Patrick, he colored them all black. I don't care. We could have the party here. Doesn't matter, Cheston said. Well, who should we invite? Mother. Cheston dropped the black crayon in the crease of the coloring book. I do not care. But it's your 4th birthday, she said. Yes, I am aware of that. Cheston's blonde hair swooped in a curling sea on his forehead, and his eyelashes batted like waking butterflies. Finally, he sighed. Maybe Cameron. Cameron, yes, the mother said, because I hate Cameron. Why would you say that, Cheston? Why would anyone say anything? Someone was nicking the father's scotch. He drank only pricey single malts, Lefroy, Ardbeg, Brulady. The father suspected their housekeeper. The bottles were kept in a series of tall cabinets in a closet off his study. The father had just decided to mark the open bottles with a Sharpie when he saw something under one of the liquor cabinets, a sippy cup lid. The father walked to Cheston's bedroom doorway. The boy had his back to the father, facing the window, and was palming his Batman sippy cup like a brandy snifter. He swirled the drink. Ice clinked. The father was dumbfounded. Who puts 30-year-old scotch on rocks? The psychologist removed her glasses. Well, technically, there's nothing wrong with Cheston. The way she said nothing wrong made the father think that having nothing wrong might be the worst thing that could be wrong with someone. We did standard testing associative play. Cheston's a bright boy as far as that's concerned. The psychologist looked over the frame of her glasses. And there's been no recent trauma? No, they both said too quickly, without looking at one another. They lived well in 9 rooms on Central Park West. The father had inherited a great deal of money, and his work was managing his own wealth. The mother volunteered at various charities. We should be careful, the psychologist said, trying to diagnose what might just be a reasoned belief system. My son is Jeffrey Dahmer, thought the mother. What I'm saying, the psychologist took off her glasses, is that I don't think Cheston is depressed. I think, well, she chewed her lip, I think your baby is a nihilist. At halftime, Cheston's soccer coach pulled the father aside. Listen, the coach said, I appreciate Cheston's unique personality, but he keeps shooting at our goal. It was true. Cheston's condition had progressed to mereological nihilism. He no longer believed in the composition of things. For Cheston, one goalpost was just like another. In fact, was no different than a telephone pole or a doghouse. Maybe play him it forward, the father suggested. In the second half, Cheston no longer observed the random nature of sidelines. He dribbled through the parents to the next field over and booted the ball into the street. Good kick, buddy, yelled the father. Monkey shoeshine lumber truck, Cheston said at dinner one night. What? His mother asked. Ballamagafu, Cheston said, and then he made a farting noise and stabbed himself in the leg with his fork. While the mother put him to bed, the father looked it up online. Epistemological nihilism, the father said. He's denying the validity of all knowledge, language, ritual. It's all lost meaning. He's given into complete abstraction. The psychologist said to bring him in on Monday. The mother gripped the phone. But what if Monday is too late? Oh, toddlers are incapable of that, the psychologist said, of harming themselves. But that hadn't even occurred to the mother. She was afraid of something else, although she couldn't come up with the word. The father came out of his study, holding in one hand Kant's critique of pure reason, and in the other Heidegger's nihilism as determined by the history of being. From what I can gather, if this progresses to ontological nihilism, well, he didn't finish the thought. But if we can somehow get him to differentiate between being and a being, then maybe we can still, maybe, the father turned. Low clouds raced past the window. Contagious, the mother thought, the word finally making itself known. Both parents were quiet for a moment. I've had a lover for 2 years, the mother finally said. The father said, me too, for almost 4. I hate volunteering, the mother said. I despise the poor. I embezzle money from my sister's accounts. I turned tricks in college. I didn't need the money. It was the only time I was happy. I've never been happy, the father said. I know, said the mother. The father searched for something else to say. He held up the Heidegger book. I don't understand a fucking word of this, Cecilia. That's when the mother began crying because her name was not Cecilia. Buddy, the father howled and tore at his hair. The mother rose and ran straight through the apartment, slamming into the big picture window like a bird into glass. She fell to the floor, dazed. Butter shoe blindfold, the father said, but he couldn't remember what that meant. They lay together on the floor, weeping for all they had squandered. Cheston was leaning on the doorway. smiling and swirling scotch. On his way back down the hall to his bedroom, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Oh," he said, "happy birthday." Freebird. This story is called Before You Blow. This was the summer you spent at the river, the summer of your first beer, first job, first love, the summer of '83, the summer of Joey. You met him at Gino's Fabulous Pizza at the end of your junior year of high school. Gino's was a fixture in the Gonzaga neighborhood, checkered tablecloths, candles in Chianti bottles, red sauce splattered on overcooked pasta. All the Catholic families in Spokane went there, yours included, the kids for pizza and spumoni, parents for rigatoni and chilled lambrusco. One night your family was having dinner when the owner asked if you needed a summer job, and the next thing you knew, you were a waitress. You could feel Joey's eyes on you every time you spun a ticket on the order wheel. "Lasagna, spaghetti with tips. Got it, Jeans," he'd say. The owner, Shirley, had recently allowed waitresses to dress more casually instead of buying uniforms from the food service catalog. So while the older women wore their old polyester pants and hip pocket shirts, you got to wear jeans. "Order up, Jeans," Joey would say, sliding a lasagna through the window. He worked on Friday and Saturday nights, baking the comically big lasagnas, whose recipe he claimed was noodle sauce, cheese, lather, rinse, repeat. You thought this was hilarious. But then everything Joey did and said that summer was hilarious. It felt like flirting, but you knew it could just be teasing. After all, he was at least 5 years older than you, an upperclassman at Gonzaga University, and what college senior wants to date a high school kid? Then, one day, you were counting tips and you felt someone over your shoulder. You turned and Joey smiled. "Hey, Jeans," he said. "I don't suppose I could get the phone number of that ass." Okay, then. It was to be love. That night, he pulled you into a walk-in and kissed you. Joey was 22. He had a grown man's body, a series of squares all the way up to his block of brown hair. His eyes were green and arched, with a quality one might generously call mischievous. He was pre-law and already applying to law schools. "Law school," your mother said, as if he'd just confided that he was a prince. "Well," she looked at your dad, "do you hear that, Mark? A lawyer." Your parents and brother had come to the restaurant the weekend after Joey kissed you, the hostess seating them at a foretop in your section. Joey had volunteered to bring 2 glasses of Chianti to the table and introduce himself, an old-fashioned move meant to score points with your disapproving dad. Joey small-talked about Gonzaga. "It was important that I go to a Catholic school," and his career plans. "I hope to do more with the law than just make money." And finally, he gestured back at the kitchen. "Well, I better get back to work." He shook your dad's hand firmly. "It was a pleasure meeting you." Then he bowed to your mother. "I certainly see where your daughter gets her good looks. Those are some strong genes." And with that, he turned and winked, knowing what you would hear, jeans. "A lawyer," your mother said again after Joey had left. She looked at your dad, who raised a single eyebrow of approval. Joey's roommate Patrick was also pre-law and was also from the Bay Area. For California Catholics like them in the 1980s, Gonzaga was a last-ditch safety school. Get a minor in possession or flunk a class or two, and the parents might nix Santa Clara or San Francisco, don't even think about Stanford, and exile you to cold, sleepy Spokane. There, the transplanted Californians whined about the lack of nightlife and trudged monastically through the snow, hoods up on their parkas. As Patrick used to say, "I messed around and ended up here at Fuck Up State." It was shocking the way Joey and Patrick talked about your hometown. Not that you thought Spokane, Washington was anything special, but back then you had nothing to compare it to. You'd never lived anywhere else, had never really been anywhere else. So the way they treated it, the dismissal, the condescension, the mockery, these were a revelation to you. Spokane was indeed cold, and it was surely remote. And yes, its downtown was sleepy, but Joey and Patrick were anything but monastic. They ran around like Butch and Sundance, charming their way out of D's from professors and DUIs from cops. They got drunk almost every night, sometimes with the Jesuits. They made impromptu road trips to Canada to buy kokanee beer because it had a higher alcohol content. They bought pot from the girlfriend of an English prof and speed from a biker who lived down the street. They bought booze for your high school friends and let you invite them to parties. You thought they were hilarious, sexy. They had pet names for everything, a language all their own. They called Gonzaga Gonzo U, and they called each other Fitz, Patrick Fitzgerald, and Mac, Joseph McCune. Of course, they called you Jeans. They treated the city like a playground or a college rental with no respect for windows, walls, drapes, curbs, carpets, speed limits, property, daughters. To them, the word Spokane was a modifier that meant decadent fun. They didn't just get drunk, they got spo drunk, they peed off the Monroe Street Bridge. Joey was spo hungover the next day, he puked in a neighbor's flower bed. Patrick got spo horny, he asked out the 25-year-old checker from Safeway, Harmony. And that is how you ended up one night late that summer in Harmony's brown Ford Pinto, Patrick in the passenger seat, you and Joey pressed into the small back seat on either side of Harmony's kid, Morton. Morton was maybe 2, a pacifier bobbing in and out of his mouth, no car seat to be seen. Morton, you asked the mom, is that a family name? It's a salt, Harmony said. Everyone was drinking Schlitz, the can with the big blue bull on him, because Patrick insisted malt liquor was classier than regular beer. You should call him Sportin', Joey said, like Morton from Spokane. I feel like that would limit his options, Harmony said. What could fill the hours between 5 p.m. and sunset on a summer day? You drove here, drove there, chattered inanely. You went to a thrift store and Patrick bought a trench coat. You got burgers and milkshakes. Sportin' sucked on a French fry. Everyone laughed. Someone suggested painting the graffitied railroad abutment, but you couldn't think of anything cool to paint. Sportin' sucked on his binky until he fell asleep. You'd been going out with Joey for 3 weeks by that time, and this was your second double date with Harmony and Patrick. You were surprised that Patrick would date a grocery store checker, especially one with a kid, and that's when you heard something that bothered you. Patrick telling another friend of theirs, I like the lowered expectations of townies. That night, with the sun going down, Harmony drove her Pinto along Upriver Drive and parked near Boulder Beach. Someone, Patrick maybe, suggested skinny dipping. You were nervous, but you didn't object, knowing that a vote would go 3-1, Sportin' abstaining as he slept against your side in the back seat. You were nervous because you and Joey had been progressing steadily that summer with each makeout session, kissing, he did not kiss like a high school boy, to fondling those big meaty adult hands to, well, you knew what was next. You and a college boy were about to have sex. Crazy thing, love. Sometimes you just fall for a person, but sometimes you decide to love them. You set all reservations aside and you say, okay, this is the boy I'm going to love. This is the boy I'm going to lose my virginity to this summer, right now, right here on this blanket next to this cold river. And when you decide that, well, he can do anything, say anything, and you will approve. He can say something like, you should call him Sportin', and you don't think, what an idiot. You think, that's hilarious. We should have sex. Crazy thing, love. In the back seat of Harmony's car, you turned once more and looked into Joey's wry, cocktail olive eyes. Then he reached across the sleeping toddler and put a hand on your thigh. What do you say, Jeans? You think about that moment now, 30 years later, at home in Spokane to visit your ailing father, sitting in traffic on Division Street after you've happened to glance over and see, painted on a bus bench, those same green eyes, settled in a bloated, balding face. Joseph J. McCune is now an attorney at law here in Spokane, a specialist in personal injury cases and DUIs who apparently attracts his clients from bus bench advertising. Coincidentally or not, You also became a lawyer, graduating summa cum laude from Seattle University and in the top 10% of your law school class at the University of Washington. You should probably thank Joseph J. McCune for giving you the idea of becoming a lawyer, or thank your parents for reacting the way they did when Joey said those magic words, law and school, because now you work in San Diego as a corporate lawyer specializing in intellectual property rights. Most of your clients are tech companies. And while you feel a bit guilty, condescending, you can't quite help it. You have come to think of lawyers like Joseph J. McCune as bottom feeders. Joey's singular contribution to jurisprudence being the idea that one should not immediately consent to a breathalyzer from police after one has crashed one's car into a Taco Bell. Call Joe before you blow, his bus bench advises. Mom, snaps your daughter, would you go? The light changed like 2 days ago. Amber is at the very age, 16, that you were the summer you met Joey, and she is not happy being back in sleepy Spokane, visiting her ancient grandfather, who keeps staring at her septum ring like there's a ring in his granddaughter's septum. For the last year, you and your youngest have battled over nose rings, grades, curfews, and mostly over this hunk of idiocy named Kyle, whom Amber calls Maboo. When you suggest that perhaps her boo might not raid the refrigerator every 20 minutes or that her boo might write his own term paper, Amber cries out in the endless song of her people, when are you going to start treating me like an adult? Mom, go! Horns are honking behind you, but you can't look away from this bus bench and from Joey's green eyes. Do you want to know when you become an adult? You finally ask your daughter. What? Amber is horrified, the way she gets whenever you try to say something meaningful, or actually whenever any words of any kind come out of your mouth. What are you saying? Seriously, Mom, are you having a stroke? Finally, you look from the bus bench to your daughter and you say, you become an adult the first time you see through love. And then, with your daughter fuming and the light turning yellow, you drive away from Joey's green eyes forever. The four of you got out of the Pinot quietly, hoping to not wake little Morton. Doors latched, Harmony nodded and looked back, still asleep, and you carried blankets toward the shoreline, you and Joey veering off slightly from Patrick and Harmony. You were shaking. It's cold out here, you said. We don't have to go in, Joey said. We can just lie down somewhere. You felt his hand on your waist. Even at dusk, you could sense those green eyes taking you in. You tried to muster courage. You could do this. It's what adults did. What, were you going to be a virgin forever? Stop shaking. It's Joey, hilarious Joey. Who better to? Then, in your peripheral vision, something you couldn't quite put together. You turned back. On the hillside behind you, the Pinto was creeping forward slowly toward the river. The parking brake. Had she set the parking brake? Your mind worked over that single detail as if you could go back in time and set it yourself. The car began moving faster, crunching over gravel. No, 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 Harmony yelled. Then the car picked up speed and went over the bank, nose first, 3 feet over the bluff and down into the river. It didn't make a big splash, but dipped like an ice cream cone in chocolate, then bobbed back up and tilted upright. For just a moment, you wondered if the car would float or maybe settle in shallow water. But then the front of the car began sinking, moving forward like someone easing down a hill. The rest was a blur, as hard to completely remember as it is impossible to forget. A rush of adrenalized flashes, running, splashing, screaming. Of the four of you, it made sense you'd reach the car first. You'd grown up on that river, 4 years of swimming lessons, summer camps, swims to Shark Island. You splashed over slippery rocks, current tugging at your clothes, Harmony screaming behind you, the car drifting, pointing down like a sinking ship, the hood going under, and river water at the windshield by the time you got to the passenger window, which Harmony had left half open so she could hear if her baby cried. Morton was in the back seat. Harmony had locked the door. The water was above your waist. You could just get your arms through the window, but you couldn't reach him. Morton, come here. Your feet moved along the rocks with the car river at your chest now. He was wide awake, chewing on his pacifier as water swirled around his feet. He stared at you, and all was lost until he suddenly crawled across the wet back seat and into your arms. Otherwise, you can't think of the otherwise, even now. You got his little head sideways through the open car window, scraping it on both sides, and only then did he start crying. The rest of his body slid through like a mocking version of birth itself. You held him against your chest, both of your heads out of the water as you walked back toward shore. You would end up having 3 of your own, Jerome, Aaron, and thankless Amber. But no child ever felt better against your body than that one. You moved slowly back toward shore, looking once more over your shoulder. The top of the car lurched forward, water rushing through the open window, and then it went under, bubbles rising everywhere, the shape of the car on the surface of the water for just a moment, like dirt on a grave. Harmony had reached you by then. "Oh my God, Morton." And even though she was shaking, you handed her child over. Patrick was at her side. "Holy shit, thank you." And only then did you look back to shore. It's not like you expected Joey to save the kid, but something about him standing alone on the shore, clothes completely dry, told you everything you'd ever need to know. And now, thank you. Thank you. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Alex Marzano-Lesnevich. Thank you. Alex Marzano-Lesnevich.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jess. My God, what a gift that reading was. I think my heart is still in my throat somewhere. It is an honor to share the stage with you. And what a gift this place is. Thank you, Leah, Gwen, and Adam for having me back. I think that the "yes, I want to come back" response I sent back was the fastest email I have ever sent. So thank you also to the staff who create this amazing community space, to my workshop co-leader, Elena. I'm so glad that we could reprise our soft shoe routine, yes. And to our fabulous workshop, and to the rest of you. Sewanee is magic. I love thinking of the work we're making as missives to the future. I love thinking that all the pages we're seeing in workshop are someday going to be in books that we're all going to read and pass around and introduce to others and remember these moments we're sharing together now. And I am deep in the middle of a book called Both and Neither, and while I work on a book, I tend to write essays to work through ideas, and I've been thinking a lot about the future. So I'm going to read you an essay about that. It is in 49 numbered sections, but do not worry. I'm only going to read you the first 2/3. The only thing you need to know is that we will come to a place where instead of a number on a section, I say the word skip. And in the printed version, this is represented by a dash instead of the number, but when I say it here, it's not that I'm skipping forward, quite the opposite. Instead, I want you to think about the way a record player skips on a scratch and gets stuck in that same moment. So more like a repetition or an absence of progression. And this reading is a thank you to Alex Chi. It's called Futurity. 1. On a morning early in the second month of the unprecedented time, I rise to the sound of the birds and pad to the kitchen in my slippers. The air smells of hot coffee. Snow blankets the roof just outside the window, the light glinting off it, tracing swirls on the wall. I pour the coffee, roasty, familiar, constant. A few weeks ago, I would have carried the cup to my writing desk, there said a short prayer to the God of creation, pressed my pen to the page, and tried to listen. But now I carry it back to my bedroom, where the curtains remain closed. I turn on my bedside lamp and open the novel on my nightstand. I will be in its world, not this one. 2. My jawline has become covered in blonde fuzz, and later, in front of the bathroom mirror, I see it backlit, the fuzz so pale it is visible only when struck by this light. I turn my head back and forth, looking. The fuzz wasn't there a month ago. My agent sent me notes on the latest writing I've been doing, and he included an instruction that I must search for mentions of my jawline. You mentioned the fuzz here, here, and here, he says. He means we get the point. He means the mentions are getting old. But I have lived all my decades with a smooth jawline, and to me, none of this is old. I think of change constantly, and the way change implies progression. And I wonder what that fuzz is a harbinger of. So will it grow longer? Will I someday have a beard? Or will it stay like this, so pale as to be nearly invisible, prepubescent even as time goes forward and further grays my hair, inscribes more lines on my skin? The future is as unknown to me as the strange world outside my window, the present like a scratch in one of the records my father used to play. 3. At the start of the shelter orders, a lover texted me that, fuck it, while we are all staying at home, they will grow in their soul patch. Shortly after we first met, and I told them I was on testosterone, they looked at me in envy. I can't, my levels are already so high, I'll look too much like a man, they said. I'm like you, I don't want to pass. But your body takes its time. You'll get to choose where you land. 4. This lover will come back up, so let's give them a name. Let's call them Ray. 5. When I wrote that I just met Ray, what I meant was that we had recognized something in each other on a dance floor. The floor almost empty, the music so loud as to hold all the space of the place, and our bodies had begun a silent communication, moving this way, then that. This was still, of course, in the before time. Disco lights looped the floor, some colored in ice blue. The beams they cast like shadows had been shaped into snowflakes. Watching the swoop of the carved light, I imagined the sheets of colored polyethylene that had made it, that cool blue pressed to a burn like fire. The lights chased us, and the music grew louder, and I had grimaced or Ray had grimaced. They said something, but I didn't hear. I shook my head, and they came in close, their mouths suddenly fitted over the shell of my ear. Want to find some quiet? I felt the sound lap in my ear canal, warm. Then the cold slap of outside, the sudden grace of dark, the stars above us so still. They pulled from their pocket a key. The key fitted the lock of their office, which turned out to be across the street. They knew where the security cameras were, the unlocked closet. Afterward, the two of us, a little punchy, maybe with drink, maybe with flush, we laughed at the irony of finding ourselves in a closet. We who have located whole lives in the stepping out of closets. There was a small red light, like in a dark room, and I remember using its dimness as cover to look at them, to really look. The hair, dark enough to be inky, clipped short as bristles. The jaw, square yet soft. Their shoulders, their breasts. They watched me look, the whites of their eyes pink in the light, the black mirror centers. Beads of sweat had formed on their upper lip. Their sports bra, 2 sizes too small, had left angry red marks across their soft chest. I looked at those scores, and they looked at me, and I knew what they were seeing in me, too. Silence stretched into something sinewy enough to hold us. For the first time, I thought how alike were the words wrapped and wrapped. When they spoke, their voice scratched the edge of tears. I didn't know it would be so healing, they said. I've never been with someone else who... I don't think I let them finish, my mouth over theirs. 6, an incomplete list of things I have heard called queer about the pandemic. The surge in people making their own sourdough starter out of nothing more than flour and water and thyme. The rise in mask for mask jokes. Or what does a lesbian bring to a second date? No, not a U-Haul, a COVID test. Or U-Hauling as a responsible public health move, cuffing season, sex pods, the New York Public Health Department recommending people, quote, make it a little kinky with glory holes, the rise in OnlyFans and Findom, which is to say the rise in sex work. Thirst traps, sexting, phone sex, Zoom sex, FaceTime sex, sleeping with your roommates. The very fact of a pandemic, loss, grief, the impossibility of imagining a future. 7, Futurity, noun. Yes, all right, future time, the sense that there will be a future. The very thing we are all holding on to as we wait for it to arrive. The shadow or light that the future casts over the present. But also futurity, noun. A race for 2-year-old horses into which they are entered before they are born. 8. And all right, as a metaphor for gender, maybe that's a little obvious. But futurities offer some of the richest prizes in horse racing. 9. From the windows of my study, I can see the largest hospital in Maine. By law, the ambulances must turn off their sirens this close, and so when I look up from my desk now, 2 months into the at-home time, I see flashing lights. After a few days of this constant silent, screaming alarm and of the helicopters that land on the hospital roof at all hours, their thrum so loud as to consume me in the beat of metal wings, I write a prayer with a blue Sharpie onto a purple index card and thumbtack it to the wall between the 2 windows, right in my line of sight. May they be safe. May they be happy. May they be healthy. May they live with ease. 10. When we learn that men are dying at an exponentially higher rate than women from this virus, a friend asks me if I'll keep taking testosterone. I mutter something about how, well, I'm not going to go off a drug without medical advice, and my doctor has other things on her mind right now. But that answer, I know, is bullshit. One of the purported benefits of the daily gel I use versus a weekly shot is that its progress is slow. And each day I must choose to apply it, must affirm my choice of who I am transforming to slowly, visibly be. I could choose no. What I really mean, but don't say, is that men have shorter life expectancies, more heart attacks, higher rates of dementia, and that I already knew all that. The trade-off did occur to me. But I do ask the doctor if I will lose my hair. That's what Rogaine's for, she says. It's not a reason not to live your life. And obviously, I want to live my life. I just want to live it with hair. 11. Here is how researchers say we slot one another into genders with a glance. The shape of the hairline, the shape of the eye socket, the ratio of hip to waist, the shape of the jawline, the shape of the chest. Clothing, hair length, manner of standing, where fat is distributed, quickness to smile. A 1995 study was titled, "You Can Tell by the Nose." We look for patterns. We look for what we know how to see. And I get that with the bodily factors, I'm talking about sex, not gender. But what I'm really speaking of is how people perceive, the slotting, the conflation that happens in the instant they perceive. That instant is what I keep thinking about it. In it, a whole narrative, my life, unfurls. 12. Imagine the horse's owner perusing the pages of racing magazines, loading websites late at night in an office tucked in beside the tack room and a stable, the smell of sweat and dirt thick over the printouts of lineages that litter the desk. Perhaps a cup of coffee rests beside them. Perhaps a pregnant mare whinnies from down a long line of stalls, pacing before settling into her bed of hay. The owner sips from the coffee, clicks the mouse to scroll down the page, searches the lists of the races in several years' time. You have pictured the owner either male or female, which? Doesn't matter. The owner isn't the one we care about now, but which? 13. Imagine, too, that equine fetus, long limbs folded beneath it, not yet ready to run. Tiny hooves still soft and shredded, not yet hardened by the pounding of movement. How now it rests and grows curled in the warm, wet womb for 11 months. The owner clicks and sips and allots money and decides which racing ovals will inscribe its future, chooses the paths it shall someday run. I have a twin brother. We had a triplet sister, a sister in chromosomes at least. She would die too young for any of us to know much about her, so here is what little we knew. The blue eyes of a baby, tiny like us and like us premature, girl. So one of each, and then me. 2 girls and a boy, the announcement. At 8, I became aware that I wasn't a girl. 14. One of the first known people to use testosterone to alter his body was British 24-year-old Michael Dillon in 1939. He'd sought the treatment nominally for his menstrual periods, but already wore the clothing of a man. Before Dillon, men had grafted slices of chimpanzee testicles to their own. They had attached snippets taken from the genitals of goats. They had had the tubes that carried sperm from the testicles blocked in the hope that stopping its movement would create a surplus of vigor. Even William Butler Yeats underwent that surgery, hoping to keep up with a younger lover. Freud, too, and he demanded the doctor not disclose it until his death. Dillon took pills. In writer Pagan Kennedy's account of his transformation, it is one way and absolute, and the hormone is what achieves and legitimizes it, upholding the sanctity of the binary. Of Dillon before he was Michael, Kennedy writes, "She became the first woman on record to take the drug with the intention of changing her sex." A sentence elapses, only a sentence. Quote, "As soon as Dillon could look entirely male, he became invisible." 15. My writing seems to come out these days like my thoughts do, in snippets, disconnected, seized up. The thoughts can't adhere. I try to make a narrative line, but only these dots appear. Even Ray and I don't see each other anymore. I'm alone in my apartment, no one to witness me or me then. 16. We need a sense of what you want your body to look like, my agent writes. You tell us what feels wrong, what you want to change, but you don't tell us what you want to change to. He is asking me to imagine what comes after. 17. Levels of testosterone for those assigned female at birth generally stop at 60 or 70 nanograms per deciliter of blood. Levels for those assigned male at birth generally start at 270 to 300. So note the vastness of that unnamed middle. When I began taking testosterone, my own levels fell very clearly on one side of the divide. Now I am caught in that middle, a sentence without knowledge of its end. 18. At times, I try to imagine what I want the United States to look like when or if all of this will be over. I try to imagine us taking care of one another. I try to imagine my relatives and neighbors not reacting to the virus as though it is political. I try to imagine 343,593, the count as I write this, tomorrow it will be higher, people not dead, so many of them black and brown, and so many of them economically marginalized. While I'm at it, I try to imagine black men and women not killed by the police, immigrants not hunted at the border, a nation not founded on genocide, the erasure of the violences that make this place. 19. And okay, I try to imagine what I want to look like, but I grew up in the same damn binary everyone else did. The same damn America. 20. The truth is, I don't know how to answer my agent. It is easier for me to say what I don't want, harder for me to say what I do. 21, quote, "Queerness is not yet here. Queerness is an ideality. Put another way, we are not yet queer. We may never touch queerness, but we can feel it as the warm illumination of a horizon imbued with potentiality. We have never been queer, yet queerness exists for us as an ideality that can be distilled from the past and used to imagine a future. The future is queerness's domain," writes Jose Esteban Munoz. 22. There was a year once when I pricked myself 144 times with needles. I had known that my body could not cradle a baby, historically a mark of womanhood, but my body has always been made to fail that part, and that to do so would endanger my life. I'd assumed that there would be some future solution to this. Maybe a partner would carry, maybe science would catch up. A bit of regression to how I soothed myself to sleep when I was a child. No need to be afraid of death, for science would surely solve it before I got old. My belief in science more potent than in any magic, any dream, any god. But I had aged, and the future had arrived, and there was no solution beyond pulling forth what was inside this body, my body, and so I went to doctors and had a probe inserted in myself and saw my own insides on the screen and the nascent beginnings of the material that would go into making another person. Every morning and every night, I drew clear liquid into a syringe and injected it into the ring of fat around my belly button, moving the needle clockwise to a new site, mimicking the march of time. 23. After each shot, I ate a cracker spread with the cheapest caviar, the kind you can get at the supermarket for $6 a jar. I'd begun the ritual as a joke, a need to find joy and inject levity into the process, a need to disrupt how medicalized the whole thing was, how sterile all those foreign objects I used to break my skin. We were trying to coax my body into such a high estrogen level it would release more eggs than the usual monthly one. I would, therefore, eat tiny eggs. Rhyming action, a move familiar to any writer. But what began as a joke was soon overcome by sensation. The smoothness of the hard little eggs between my palate and tongue, the salty pop as intense as the sea. The joke became prayer, the taste as much a benediction as tears. 24. One morning in the middle of the year of injections, I went to the doctor for a monitoring appointment. I did this a couple of times a week each cycle and had long since asked to insert the probe myself. A small bit of agency, claimed. On the screen, black fuzz resolved itself to the shape of the follicles inside me, the spaces growing larger to shelter eggs. That afternoon, for a class I was taking, I went to a laboratory as sterile and white as the exam room I'd left. There, 5 dead bodies were laid out on slabs. I put on a plastic butcher's apron and clear plastic goggles and nitrile gloves, and my partner handed me a scalpel and pointed. I brought the blade to the body's fallopian tube. That's not quite right. I don't want to say the body. Not doing something as intimate as slicing her up. But there, you see the problem again, her. I know nothing of this person, only the shape of their body. From this, I have deduced a pattern. I have no other word to choose. I don't know who she was beyond the mark of those ovaries. With my scalpel, I split them open, pale pink and the size of green cocktail olives. I saw the tiny hard eggs within, larger than a pinprick, a pencil point, the period of a sentence. Each a potential future that had never been. 25. The drug worked. My body released eggs. Never many, but enough. These were injected with sperm, grown for several days, and then frozen. The cycle repeated once, twice, 3 times again. 26. Still, I waited. That fertilization had happened was no proof life could ever take root. It seemed likely that I would be told it was all for naught, that the child I had wanted since I was a child was not possible. It seemed impossible that I would get anything I wanted that much, as though the act of wanting made it impossible. Does everyone carry such felt knowledge of doom inside them, such belief in the impossibility of the future? Or only those of us born into bodies that cast us into a narrative that doesn't fit? As though having the audacity to want and to act on that want would itself be a trick, the coin proffered by a magician that vanishes with the opening of the hand that ought to reveal it. 27. So I remember the whoosh in my chest when over the phone at the end of the year, I was finally told that some, 5, of the embryos were viable. How in that instant a path opened to a door that opened to a future. 28. Maybe I only ever write about the problem of how to believe in the future. 29. I was ready to hang up then. I remember that too. I was awash in glee as though all at once the blood of my body had been rinsed in relief. I wanted to get off the phone, away from the doctor's voice, and just feel. 30. But she kept on. Of the 5 there's, she said, and she told me the sex of the embryos. How many this kind? How many that? There was a clear favorite. Not even odds, not at all. 31. The child in my daydreams acquired a gender. Skip. When I emerged from the restaurant where I'd taken the call, there was a child standing on the street, gripping a mother's hand. The mother, irrelevant to me, never what I would be. But that child, short blonde hair, striped shirt, a smudge on its cheek. It appeared to be of the gender that matched the sex I had just been told that my someday child would likely be, and I remember how closely I observed it. I remember the feel of a daydream arranging itself, as though it were straightening its shirt hem, spitting into its palm, patting down its hair. Skip. And sure, I do my best to note in my daydreams now that a child's gender is not known just because their chromosomes are. Of that, I myself am proof. And really, even those chromosomes may turn out to be more complex as each embryo grows more than the 70 to 100 cells it has now. I know enough about sexology now to know that the simplicity we've been bottle-fed is a lie, always has been a lie, that there are far more than two options and they are not as set as we might imagine. I do my best to imagine a doctor informing me of that complexity. I do my best to imagine a child eventually coming to me the way I did to my parents. I do my best to imagine them speaking a truth about who they are and it not being the truth I expected. Or, conversely, the queer truth of the queer version of the unimaginable future. I do my best to think that perhaps they will be the most gender-conforming kid around. And I'll have to wrap my mind around that. I do my best to hold space for every possibility. Skip. But I still can't imagine child without imagining gender. Skip. And what is a dream if not a narrative? Skip. And what is a narrative if not constant foreclosure, this instead of that? Skip. What is the future if not the thing that replaces all other possible worlds? Thank you. I'll stop there.